go. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Jackie Jacob, and I am one of the poultry specialists here at the University of Kentucky. The other one is Dr. Tony Pescatori. He'll be the presenter today. This is the fourth of our small flocks webinars specific for Kentucky. So the regulations that, if any, are mentioned, or the conditions are typical of Kentucky. Some things, of course, will be applicable anywhere, but this was designed for Kentucky. The recordings from the previous ones are available on our YouTube channel, as well as available through our Facebook page, and I will put those in the chat for anyone who doesn't have them. And this one is also being recorded and will be available later as well if you want to follow up with it to something that you might have missed. So we are also starting a webinar series starting in April that is more for commercial operations, small scale commercial operations. This is mainly for backyard flocks. So if you're interested, those will be up on the Facebook page as well. So it's all yours, Tony.
All right.
Oh, if you have a question, please put it in the chat box. Please keep your mics muted during the presentation so it doesn't disrupt it for anybody else. If the question that you type in is related to a clarification of what he's talking about, I will interrupt him and ask the question. Otherwise, I'll hold it to the end. So feel free to type your questions in the chat box. Okay, Tony.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about manure management and dead bird disposal in regards to the small flock. It's not working. Why is that not working? Hold on. Hold on. Okay. So when we talk about small flocks, why do we have small flocks? We keep small flocks for meat and eggs, as a hobby, have something ornamental around, or as a family activity. All those come down to personal enjoyment. And as we're managing small flocks, we need to start thinking about, how do I make my personal enjoyment even better? What are the things that get in the way of my personal enjoyment? Well, there are responsibilities that come with a small flock. You got to provide feed and water. You have to provide shelter and protection. You got to collect eggs. You have to control pests. And then we have the removal of manure that the birds are producing. We also have to be able to visually inspect the birds on a regular basis. And then we have to deal with any sick and dead birds. All these are your responsibilities. Many of them are everyday chores, or at least weekly activities that you need to do and be on top of. So my statement to you is, make your life easier so that you can enjoy your flock. There are certain things that you can do to make it so it's easier for doing your chores. Design the building for ease of doing chores. What are the things you're going to have to do every day, and how is it easier to do them? You're going to have to feed, you're going to have to water. How do you make it easier on yourself? One of my things that are important is, make it tall enough for you to enter and move around. Make the door so you can get in. Make it so it's tall enough in the pens that you can move around, so you don't have to be squatting or working on your knees trying to get something done. So make it tall enough. Make sure you can enter it and move around easily. Can you can you fill the feeders? Can you water the birds? Can you gather the eggs easily? Can you do these things and do it well? Can you keep pests and predators out? How are you designing the building or making the building so that you can keep pests down, keep predators down, make sure you have your feed stored in the proper way, and make sure you're protecting the birds. Can you remove equipment from the pens or the buildings easily, and can they be cleaned? And then the last one people don't think about until it's time to do it is, can you remove the manure easily? Can you get in there where the birds are at and get the manure out without having to work too hard? All these things on this list will make your life easier and make you enjoy your flock even more. Well, let's start with manure management. If you got to remember, you're feeding the birds, and if you feed them, it will come. So we need to deal with manure. It's not going to go away by itself. So how are we going to manage it? And it's important to manage manure because of the concerns. If manure gets wet, it can smell. If it gets too dry, it could be very dusty. It will attract flies, and manure is a good way to distribute disease. Many of the diseases that we fight in small flocks have a life cycle out of the bird. So coccidiosis, worms, those type blackhead disease are all that have an outside the bird part of their life cycle. So, and also any of the disease organisms can be in that manure. So those are the concerns when we're dealing with manure and how we handle it. The best thing is to have a plan before it all piles up on you. One of the things is, if you're going to put it outside, particularly with the weather we've had this last month, make sure you cover it. An inexpensive tarp with some weights can cover it down, because if you have an exposed uh, pile of manure and it rains hard, you can get runoff from it and do some damage. It can do damage to your ponds on your farm. It could also pollute our waterways. And in the karst area, it can even pollute our groundwater. So let's think about always covering our piles or storing it so we don't have it in contact with rain or other precipitation like snow and ice. More the more concentrated manure is very rich in nutrients. And if you have roosts in the buildings where the birds are going to congregate during the evening, a lot of the manure concentrates under the roost. That's an area where we need to clean it out, and that's a good way of concentrating your manure. But at the same time, if you don't design your facilities well, you have roosts that are in your way from collecting that manure. So when you ask you how often should I clean out, it really depends on a few things. One, it depends on the number of birds that you have. How many birds are in the facility and at what density? Also, the size of the birds. Obviously, a mature laying hen is going to produce more uh, manure than a baby chick. However, a market ready broiler is going to produce even more manure than a laying hen. And if we're talking turkeys, we even have a larger deposition. We also depends on what the chickens are being fed. We can change the consistency of the manure by what's being fed. If the animals is diets are high in fiber or salt, they could have runny droppings. Or if it's high in whole grains, it could have sticky droppings. And it also depends on the bedding type that you use to bed your facilities. And then we also talk about the time of year. Time of year becomes very critical depending on what's happening in your house. You don't want to remove manure too much in the winter because it acts as a heat source for the birds when if it's breaking down. But at the same time, if it's getting wet from precipitation or getting wet from condensation, you want to get that out of there because it'll build up ammonia. Summertime, if the birds are drinking a lot or they're having loose droppings, the manure can get wet, and you might want to take it out more. You have to judge what's happening in your house as you decide how you're going to manage your manure. So the first thing is the bedding materials, the type of materials we're going to use. An ideal bedding material is one that absorbs moisture. It wants to retain some moisture. We use bedding material to dilute the fecal material, the excreta, and we also acts as a way to minimize contact of the birds to the fecal material as it builds up. It also provides insulation from cold floor temperatures, and it provides a cushion to the birds to lay on. It'll help reduce good quality bedding will reduce breast blisters. However, wet bedding will increase breast blisters. So the function of the bedding material is to absorb moisture, to cushion the bird, to do some insulation, and if it's done right, will help reduce breast blisters on the birds. There's lots of different bedding materials out there. Uh, there's two examples of wood shavings, but there's all kinds of different ones. Ideally, the best bedding material is pine shavings. Pine shavings have a nice texture to them. They do absorb water and they do act as an insulation. However, they can be kind of expensive depending on where you buy them and the quantity are. But they will be the gold standard of bedding materials. We have some parts of the state that are close to Missouri that we can use rice hulls. They are a finer material, but they do make a great litter. You can have hardwood shavings, and traditionally people say don't use hardwood shavings, but hardwood shavings are fine to use if you have a closed drinking system like a nipple system. The problem with hardwood shavings, if they're wet or if they're uh, get wet, is they can leach tannins out of the hardwoods. And if you have an open water trough or an open drinking system and the shavings get in it, it can leach out of those hardwood shavings. Another one that we have ample supply of is sawdust. You want dried sawdust if at all possible. High moisture sawdust, like from fresh cut wood, is going to have a problem with moisture and moles, and it can be a problem. But good dried sawdust can be utilized. Chopped straw can be used. However, it's got to be very short in the 1 to 2 inch range. And if it's much longer than that, you can have caking problems. Then you can also use shredded newspapers. They are somewhat absorbent. However, don't use glossy paper. I know people get a tendency want to sit there and take the shredded paper out of their paper shredder at home, but that is very glossy. It will slick over and cause leg problems in the birds, especially young birds. So, and it will also cake up. So, picking an ideal bedding material is important. So if we bed our animal the house, usually we're talking about 2 inches to 3 inches. You can tell by that. You don't want to you put a lot of material in there that because it just gives you more material to have to hand at the end. But you want enough material to absorb the water that is being spilled, or if you have condensation or other moisture problems. One of the best ways that a small flock can get rid of or utilize their manure is by composting. And what we have in raw manure is you have the fecal droppings, you have the uric acid, you have whatever bedding material in there, and any spilled feed. You also have a degree of moisture, and and you have to think of the bedding material or the litter as a live organism. We have bacteria that's growing in there. We have other microorganisms in there. So you have all that stuff occurring. Now, one of the things that people sometimes don't realize is that pure manure from laying hens or any animal without any bedding material is very rich and what we call very hot. It can burn crops and it can destroy and cause different things to occur. So raw manure is not a good fertilizer because it can do damage to the plant. However, if we can bring it through the composting process, we can make it a valuable source of nutrients for plants. So if we sit there and take raw manure, add the bedding materials, add water, heat, and give off gases, what'll happen is it will change the composition of it, and it will have a mixture of organic material. It'll have minerals in it, and it'll help retain moisture. So by simply going through the steps of composting, we take something that is very rich in nutrients that could hurt the plants. By doing a organized composting, we can get a finished product that has value to the producer or to the gardener. So the things that you're required for composting is you need two things in regards to the content. You need a carbon source and you need a nitrogen source. And the carbon source makes up 70% of the material we're going to compost. So that can include the bedding material such as the wood shavings. It could be your yard waste. It could be your garden waste. It could be leaves. On the right side of the screen, you can see what the ratio of carbon to nitrogen is. Our nitrogen source in composting is the manure, and that'll make up anywhere from 25 to 30% of the manure that we're putting in there. We get some from we can get some nitrogen from the plant materials as well. So when we sit there and look at this, you got to make sure you have the right blend of materials when you're making a composter. You know, uh, a multi-stage process where we're going to go through different stages is you can take the litter out of the house when you have about 40% manure and 60% bedding material. You add about 6 inches of litter in the compost and plus 3 inches of concentrated manure from under the perches. Add about 3 inches of carbon source, such leaves, straw, wood shavings, or wood chips, and fill up the composter. By putting that, layering it like that, you get a good blend, and we're going to be able to aerate it. We don't want a closed system. We want to get oxygen to it because we need oxygen in order for the bacteria to be the aerobic bacteria, the ones that like oxygen, to bloom. If you have it too tight of a compost pile, or you have it so no air can get in it, the anaerobic bacteria will form, and that'll make your compost stink. So it's a process of making sure we get oxygen to it. All right. Here's an example of a simple composter that is filled. It's got easy to fill and be manage. You can make something out of this out of just recycled pallets as well. So when we're doing multi-stage, you're putting the compost in for about 2 weeks. Just leave it filled. Monitor temperature if you have if you can get a large thermometer, and After 2 weeks or so, transfer the material from one bin to the second bin, or and let it sit for 3 more weeks. So in this case, you have 3 bins. You're moving the compost from one bin to the next, and you have hopefully have a finished product. So at the end of there, one of the things you'll notice in this side is you have a cover on top of the compost. That is always a good idea, whether it's a composting bin like this or it's a composting bin like this. One of the things is you want to keep other animals from digging in there. So yeah, an easy way to do it is put a piece of wire over the top, like screen or chicken wires, and that'll keep any predator, any animal from digging into it. And then once you move it, you can start your next refill if that's necessary. But you got to remember, it's going to take you about 5 weeks to compost it, but once you're done, you have a finished product that you can use. We want to run this with a heat, so we're also kind of killing off the harmful bacterias, but at the same time promoting the good ones. And we're looking to run about 130 degrees Fahrenheit to and have reached that temperature to show it's got a good activity. So other materials that may be required is moisture. You may have to add moisture to a composting pile if it's too dry. You don't want it dripping wet, but you do want a moisture content about 40 to 60%. And the simple way of telling that is take the materials you're trying to compost, squeeze the ball of compost material in a paper towel and see how much water is released. If the compost remains clumped together, when you release it, it's the right moisture content. All right. So when you get doing compost like this, you're taking organic matter and you're adding water, CO2, heat, and you're creating a finished product. It has stabilized nitrogen, so it's a slow release organic form. It's 10% plant available, and you don't want to over apply phosphorus. So you want to do get a soil test before you apply this too regularly to a plot. And one of the big benefits of compost, it improves soil quality by adding organic material to the soil, or organic matter. So that compost is good for improving soils as well as utilizing the nitrogen and the nutrients that are in there. So when you start figuring this all out, one of the things you got to figure out is how much materials are you really generating. So the first thing is how much bedding material are you really using? So when you start out putting out bedding material, the first thing you need to know is how much square footage do you have in the area where you're bedding, or what is the square footage of your house? And then you need to take how many inches of bedding are you putting in there and divide the inches of bedding by 12. All right. And that will give you uh, the square footage of the total fair footage in the house, whether you calculate it on a per bird basis or on just a physical measurement times the amount of bedding. So if you have a 10 square foot house and you put in 6 inches of bedding, you have about 5 cubic feet of bedding material that you're going to have to deal with. We also need to know the amount of manure that's being produced. if you think about a hen, she's going to consume about a half a pound of feed per day. And on a dry matter basis, she's going to utilize about 45% of that for producing eggs and maintaining herself. The rest of it is going to come out of the bird. So if you're feeding so figure a quarter pound of feed consumed, times it by a feed efficiency of 45%. And if you times it by the number of hens and the number of days between cleanups, that gives you an idea how many pounds of manure you have. So let's look at this example. We have floor space per hen of 5 square feet per bird. We have bedding of 3 inches deep, which is 0.25. We have 5 hens, and we're not going to clean out for 30 days. So first of all, the amount of material for the bedding is 5 square feet per hen times 0.25 times 5, which results in 6.25 cubic feet of bedding material. From the pounds of manure is we got 0.25 pounds of feed going in each day. We're going to get 0.45 out of it, and we're going to have 5 hens. They're going to be there for 30 days. Those 5 hens in a month's time will produce almost 17 pounds of manure. So we're having to deal with 17 pounds of manure on just on 5 hens in a month's time. So by taking that, then we can go into our composting and match our materials to our manure. When we start dealing with larger populations, in this case, we have 2.5 square foot per bird. We have the 0.23 inches of manure of bedding material, and we have 25 hens. Those 25 hens are going to produce, those 25 hens are going to be there, and we're going to clean out every 30 days. So the amount of bedding material we have is the 2.5 square feet per bird times the 0.25 depth of the litter times the 25. So we have about 15.5 cubic feet of bedding material. Added on to that is our 25 hens producing over a 30-day period 84 pounds of manure. So when we start thinking about 25 hens, you're dealing in a month's time with 84 pounds of manure plus 15 cubic feet of bedding material. So that has to be dealt with, and you have to think about it. Now, you can build up manure in the house, but it's always a good idea to check about the quality of the manure and the bedding material. So a lot of things can go wrong with composting. So if you're trying to troubleshoot it, if it smells bad and you start getting sulfur or a lot of ammonia off of it, you have a pile that's too wet. It's the excess moisture is preventing oxygen from getting in there. The anaerobic bacteria has taken over and are producing the foul methane and sulfur. You need to turn the pile to try to dry it out, or you need to add more dry material such as wood shavings or leaves. So we need to fix a problem if it's occurring. If it smells like ammonia, it's the nitrogen is not right, and again, the carbon needs to be added. So you need to turn the pile. It's always a good time if you have a problem to turn it and get it restarted. Add some more carbon source to it. If the compost does not reach 130 degrees, it's way too dry, and you need to add water to the pile and get moisture back in it. And also you need to put some more layers in there and put some more litter from the poultry house. If you have if you have temperature fails to reach that 130, you can have a problem with your carbon nitrogen ratio. There's not enough nitrogen or too much carbon. So you have to adjust it by adding more product to it. If you're interested in these get reading up more about composting, there is a UK publication on home composting that provides the basis of the introduction of the carbon nitrogen sources and how to do this on a small scale. This is very applicable to composting manure as it is for any household waste or anything else that's listed in there. There's also a publication online that is composting poultry litter for you from your in your backyard flock. So this one will also give you some of the information that we have on this presentation today, but it also gives you a condensed so that you can work with what you're producing in your house and get your composting formula down to a good, easy, repeatable thing. So both those picture of publications are available from the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service, and they'll give you more details on composting poultry manure as well as composting in general. All right. We also have a fact sheet on using animal manures as a nutrient source. In that publication will be information about and it's more geared towards large scale animal operations. However, there is some useful information in there that gives you kind of a breakdown of what you can expect from manure that's directly from a poultry house. But again, another publication that you can use. And anytime, especially if you have a large number of birds, when we start producing, as that group showed, in 25 layers, we're producing 89 pounds of manure. You start getting into the 100 pounds of 100 birds and more, you're going to have a lot of manure that's being produced. And if you're going to utilize this, particularly if you're a small farm or small acreage, you want to do some soil testing to match the nutrients in the compost to the nutrients your land needs. We do have soil testing available to the public through our extension offices, and we have a testing lab in Lexington and in Princeton, and they can perform routine soil tests for you, submitting them through your county agent. Will helps you get your soil test done. So we want to make sure that we match the nutrients. We also have 2 publications through Cooperative Extension, taking a soil test sample and also what it does and how to do it. So those are 2 fact sheets that are out there that addresses the idea of soil testing. That leads us into the next topic, which is dead animal disposal. In Kentucky, dead animals have to be disposed of within 48 hours of death, and they have to be by an approved method of disposal of the carcasses. While this is geared towards more large animal, it also applies to poultry and smaller animals. So theoretically, if you look at Kentucky's law, we're either going to burn them, we're either going to bury them, burn them, boil them, or render them or compost them. So approved methods in Kentucky is incineration, boiling or steaming for 2 hours, burying with restrictions. You cannot bury in a floodplain. You have to bury your car. You cannot bury a carcass within 100 feet of a stream, sinkhole, well, spring, lake, public highways, residences, or stables. You have to bury them in a hole that's at least 4 feet deep. I don't know what your land is like, but I wouldn't be able to dig a 4 foot deep hole on my property if I use dynamite. Uh, and then you need to open the carcass up, the abdominal and thoracic cavities, and then you have to cover them with 2 inches of quicklime and at least 3 feet of soil. They can be removed by a duly licensed rendering establishment, and in the case of some counties, they do have a dead animal pickup service. So you can use that if you have a large number of birds die. You might want to use that, or they can be deposited into a contained landfill that's approved, or they can be compost. So when you look at this list, and you go through incineration or boiling or burying, you really get down to, depending on your county, whether there's dead animal pickup, or if uh, you're going to have to dispose them through a landfill or composting. So the real options that you have in Kentucky for disposing of dead birds, unless it's a major mortality that you had, you can double bag the carcass and place it in your trash pickup, because it's going to go to a approved landfill. I wouldn't recommend that if you have large kill off of birds, but if you have a few birds every once in a while, that is probably the easiest way for a small flock producer to produce to get rid of the birds. Or you can compost dead birds. Very similar to the composting system is very similar to the manure system. So instead of using the manure as the nitrogen source, you're using the dead animal. So we do have a on-farm composting of animal mortalities publication. Composting of dead animals for birds can be done very successfully. And if you're having a larger type of operation, that may be what you want to go to, is have a, a, a composter that is designated for your dead bird disposal. All these things we have addressed tonight are things that are the the things you don't think about when you think about your pretty chickens or your fresh eggs or the meat you're going to get, but it's part of raising birds. So, in summary, what you really need to do is plan ahead on what you're going to do. And that's not just about waste management and dead animal disposal, but it's about everything. What chores have to be done every day? How can I make my life easier by planning ahead and designing things so that it's easier to use? It's always a good idea to reuse the manure as compost. You don't want to use fresh manure directly on the plants, because you can do that damage to them. And you need to dispose of your dead birds in a safe manner, whether it's through the landfill or through a composting system. But the most important thing is to be a good neighbor. And if you really think about it, there are three things that cause problems with uh, uh, neighbors. It's odor, it's flies, and it's noise. While noise will not be controlled by good management of manure and dead birds, but odor and flies will be. So, with that, I'll be glad to take any questions and discuss this in further detail.
Okay, guys, you can type your question in the chat box, or if it's a long thing you want, you can undo your mic and ask your question. So any questions? Somebody's asking what insects attack in eggplant. We don't do pests for crops.
Yeah.
This is a poultry webinar. What do you mean by eggplant? Somebody asked if quail manure would be handled the same way.
Yes, quail manure is actually leaving a little more concentrated than chicken manure, and it is very dry if it's separated out. So yes, you will definitely need to send it through a composting situation.
Okay, someone just got day-old chicks. I have to give them electrolyte in the water. They seem to, do I have to give them electrolyte in the water? They seem to be eating and drinking.
If you don't need to put the electrolyte in there, if they're on eating and drinking, you'll be fine. One thing you can do to make sure they're all eating is pick up the chick, feel in their crop area around their neck, and if they've been eating, their crops will be full. So that's a good check for any of you when you're starting new chicks, to check the crop to make sure they're on feed.
Yeah, the crop is located on the outside of the chicken, so it's easy to feel. And all 100% of your chickens should be eating.
And it's on the neck, just outside the body cavity.
Right. There's a question about cow manure, but we don't deal with cow manure, but you would handle it in pretty much the same way, right?
Yeah.
Not very many people around here have cows in their backyard, but if you're having cow manure, you can compost it, and the fact sheets do discuss animal manures in general, so it will discuss that. Any other questions? Got a couple more minutes and then we're going to shut her down if nobody asks a question. So again, I put in our Facebook page that had the webinars. It has updates on activities for small flocks in Kentucky, so you can. Okay. I have a chicken that has 2 anuses that work. I don't know what that means. Will I have to wipe its butt when it's an adult?
It has probably not. It's probably, if they're functional, they'll work.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they mean by having 2 anuses that work, but you shouldn't if they're having caking on the butt, that's a different situation. What are the pros and cons of using a chicken tractor?
The chicken tractor, it allows you to dilute your manure around a field. That was the whole concept behind them. It maintains the vegetation as you're moving it around. That is the biggest advantage of it, and it's spreading the manure around.
It's not something I would recommend for a backyard if your people are going to use the ground after the chickens have been on it because of salmonella for humans. Chelsea was trying to expand on it with, her question was mutations. I'm not sure what that
Yes,
means.
the 2 anuses were a mutation.
Oh, I get it. Okay, it has 2 okay.
It probably has 2 vent openings. Whether they're both functional or not really depends on, you know, how the deformity occurred.
Okay, now I get the question. And you shouldn't have to wipe the butt. Do you recommend any plant added to the compost so we control insects, or sufficient control of moisture should be enough?
Yeah, you don't want to. Controlling the insects also can control the bacteria. As a young extension specialist many years ago, I thought it would be a good idea to add tobacco sticks to it. Well, the tobacco stick not only prevented the bacteria, the insects from growing, they also killed off all the microorganisms.
So adding tobacco is not a good
Adding
idea.
tobacco is not a good idea. So anything you would add into it, you know, maybe marigolds and things like that would be a possibility. But I know for a fact that tobacco don't work.
So controlling the moisture should control flies, right?
Right. Keeping it at the right moisture does, yes. Plus the heat. You got to remember, it's 130 degrees. It's not going to be very conducive to the larvae of the insects.
Okay, I'm not quite sure about this. Do you recommend a compost best in our plant eggplant? That doesn't make sense, sorry.
Is it like your egg processing plant?
It has eggplant as one word, but do you recommend a compost best in our plant eggplant?
I don't get it either.
And unless they're trying to ask about compost for growing eggplants, I don't know. Do I need to provide dust bathing for chicks as well, like sand possibly?
Not while they're in the down stage. As they get their juvenile feathers, they'll start dust bathing.
They
But
really like it.
they really do like it, and in the down phase, they won't dust bathe as much. But once they start getting their juvenile feathers, they'll start dust bathing.
It'll help to control the
Parasites.
parasites.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all the questions I'm seeing so far. Oh, do you recommend the Tricantera on chicken?
Tricantera. What is Tricantera?
I'm not sure what that is. That's an international person.
Now let me see what it looks like.
And then there's a question on what do you use in the dust bath?
Simple sand. I would use a play sand. The stuff you would put in a sandbox for kids is what I would use. If you want to, if you have you can also add in some diatomaceous earth within the sand, and that'll help with any parasites.
I'm not sure what that plant is. It's used in human medicine.
Tricantera.
It's native to Central America and Northern and South America. So I don't know anything about it.
I don't either.
Do adult chickens require vaccinations?
Our recommendations for vaccination is to have them at day old be vaccinated for Merck's disease. If you're going to keep them a long time, or if you've had problems in the past, you can also do a vaccination for coccidiosis. And I would not vaccinate any for any disease unless I knew that it was a problem on the property that we're raising the chickens on.
Right. Same type of material for quail as well. I would imagine that would be in the dust bath.
Yes, that would be sand. And like I say, I would use play sand because it's the purest. And I would use the diatomaceous earth if I have a parasite problem.
Okay. Any other questions? Somebody wants to take a picture with us. If you want to take a picture of our screen, go right ahead. Someone said thank you. Somebody's trying to join.
Okay.
Any other questions? Is it normal for chickens to sunbathe?
Sunbathe.
Yes. Yeah, they do that a lot.
They go out there in the sun. They like to lay out there.
Yeah, they'll stretch out and lay. I've seen them do that.
Now, if you have naked neck chickens or things of that nature, you do need to worry about sunburns.
Yes, and so if you're showing birds, some birds, the pigment in the feathers decreases as they in the sun. Somebody want to know about our pens that are in the picture behind me. How do they predator proof? If you look around the outside edges, we have an electric fence that goes around all of the pens to keep the predators out. We only had we lost one bird to a raccoon, I think,
Yeah,
which we ended up trapping. But the electric fence seemed to help.
and it's got small gauge wire on the inside of the hoop wire.
Yes, sir.
And
Okay.
it's also, the plans for that are on our website, and the videos are on there as well on how to build those.
Yeah. Reynald, do you have a question?
Do you recommend
What was that?
hello?
What's your
Hello?
question? We can hear
The
you.
risk was in our plant.
I don't get it.
I'm sorry, I still don't understand the question. Can't hear you. No, you muted. I think
Okay.
he was the one that was asking about the eggplant, so
Mhm.
I'm not sure about that. So, frostbite prevention treatment. I read dog foot wax worked, but haven't tried it.
It probably does.
I've never heard of it.
It
I don't have a dog.
probably does. I mean, you're, obviously on the combs and wattles, if you put a something like the same type of product. Now, I don't know what's in it, so I don't know if there'd be a residue or not, but it should work as a protection.
Would it work on their feet as well?
Probably. But then again, we don't know exactly what's in it, so you do have to worry about residues.
Yeah. Any other last minute questions? Anybody? No? Okay. Thank you guys very much. I am turning off the recording. And